You explore the interaction between Bitcoin, money, and energy very deeply in your newest book. Most people come from the scarcity mindset around energy, thinking, oh, we can't waste it, we can't use more of it because there's not enough.
If you are forced to use a monetary system, that means you don't have true freedom of speech. And Bitcoin is the opposite of control by the state. It's economic freedom. Again, Europe has become pretty much communist. In France, for instance, the public spending is 57% of the GDP, higher than USSR.
Welcome back to Hosting Bitcoin, where we explore the builders, thinkers, and the freedom architects who shape the future of money and human sovereignty. Our guest today is a true pioneer. He's somebody who's been thinking deeply about the meaning of money, control, energy, and decentralization long before many of us even heard what Bitcoin was. Pierre Noizat is one of the earliest voices in European Bitcoin adoption. He's the founder of Paymium, one of the oldest Bitcoin exchanges in the world, founded in 2011, and author of multiple books on Bitcoin and monetary freedom. Pierre spent more than a decade helping people understand why Bitcoin isn't just a new form of money, it's really a new operating system for energy and economic trust. Pierre, it is so wonderful to have you on Hosting Bitcoin. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, we only have an hour to cover topics that probably would take us days to reasonably unpack. So, I don't want to waste any time. I want to ask you explore the interaction between Bitcoin, money, and energy very deeply in your newest book. And so, when most people think of wealth, I think they think of material possessions, they think of something that's physical matter, but you like to correlate wealth with energy or flow. Can you just give an overview of how you think of the wealth of both the individual as well as civilizations as it relates to the concept of energy?
Yes, energy is really at the heart of the Bitcoin protocol, and it's not by chance. It's because if we look deeper into the subject of energy, which I did in the past few years, after having spent quite some time on Bitcoin, I discovered I needed to spend even more time on the subject of energy. And once you discover energy, you find another concept that just as important as energy, that is entropy. And Bitcoin, in fact, touches both ends of this spectrum. In general, it's the science of energy that contains the concept of energy and entropy. Those concepts are still evolving, by the way. It's not something that's fixed and certain, as Richard Feynman said, science is not certain. It's just at a given point in time, like today, we have a concept of energy and a concept of entropy, and they are still evolving. But in a nutshell, to make a long story short, because as you said, we could spend many days talking about this subject, and we have only an hour before us. So I'd say in a nutshell that a monetary system is about reducing the entropy of society in general, because it puts a number on all goods and services, and that number is a representation of value. And if we look deeper, value is also something that the value of money in particular is something that has two legs. One is energy. Money has energy counterparty. In the case of Bitcoin, it's the Bitcoin mining that provides the counterparty. So it's past energy. And the other leg is the social value, and that is the reduction of entropy of society I was talking about. That is, the more users you have, the more merchants are accepting the system, the monetary system, the more the system is reducing the entropy of society. So those two legs are fundamentally, anchoring the value of money for us. So then, if we want to go to a concrete example, gold, for instance, has energy value that's fairly high. That's Bitcoin. The gold mining, as we all know, uses a lot of energy. But the social value of gold is relatively low these days because nobody uses it really as a medium of exchange, and In fact, it's kind of difficult to exchange. You exchange paper, which is not really gold. So the social value has decreased quite a bit since the medieval times, I would say, as far as gold is concerned. Proof of stake money is also a good example, because if we take Ethereum, it has no energy counterparty. It has only social value. That is, the social value of Ethereum backs its value today. It's the ecosystem of developers, users, etc. But as you know, proof of stake money has no energy counterparty, just signatures. And in the middle, in between these two extremes, we have Bitcoin, which is a well-balanced monetary system, because it has good social value, because the ecosystem has grown significantly since 2010, 2009, 2010, and now it's widely accepted worldwide. So we could say that the social value of Bitcoin is quite high, whereas the energy counterparty is also significant, because you obviously, as an expert, know that there is significant energy used in mining. So we have these two legs firmly grounded for Bitcoin. And we can also talk about fiat money, traditional money, which has also high social value, because it's enforced. We are forced to use it because the government asks us to use it to pay taxes. That's a high social value, but it's kind of fake social value because it's forced on us. But it has also some energy counterparty in the fact that when it's issued, when it's created, fiat money has a borrower that has promised to repay a loan. So someone has promised to provide labor, his work or her work for some years to repay the loan, and that is the energy counterparty for fiat money. So we have all these systems, but it's interesting, I think, to look at them through the lens of the science of energy.
So you mentioned entropy as well, which I think most people at least have a working concept of energy, but entropy can be a little bit more nebulous if you haven't studied it. Could you explain to people what entropy is in kind of an overview sense, and then how that applies to something like Bitcoin, why it's important to reduce entropy?
Yes, it's a good question, Bo, because entropy is difficult to grasp. It's an even more abstract concept than energy. Energy itself is difficult to grasp because you can see energy in the form of objects, because, as you know, atoms and are sort of concentrated energy, but most of the time energy cannot be seen, like potential energy or electricity, etc. Kinetic energy, it's hard to see it. But entropy cannot be seen either, because by definition, entropy, to the simplest definition, I think, of entropy is it's hidden information. So hidden information means if the entropy is a measure of how much hidden information there is around me, that is, it's also a measure of my uncertainty about my environment. So that's the definition of entropy. So the more uncertain am I about my environment or my future, the higher my entropy, or the higher the entropy I can measure for my surroundings. So that's what entropy is fundamentally. It's a lack of information, or it's hidden information. So the second principle tells us that it takes energy to find hidden information. Essentially, that's the second principle of the science of energy. The first principle being the conservation of energy, but it's the second principle that introduces the concept of entropy, essentially saying that it keeps increasing, meaning the more you look into the future, the more uncertain you are about the future. That's fairly natural. So the second principle introduces the concept of entropy, and also the arrow of time, what we call the arrow of time, because it says that entropy is increasing over time. So just to state that, you have to introduce the concept of time. So in a single sentence, the second principle introduces the two most abstract concepts there is on this planet, that is entropy and time. And the simplicity of the statement is in stark contrast with the complexity of these concepts when you try to grasp them.
Well, knowing that we don't have days to unpack it, I'd say that's a pretty great summary for people that have never been exposed to what is entropy, why is it important for understanding what Bitcoin's value is. And for people that don't know you, you've been in the space for a long time. I mean, people that aren't familiar with Paymium, that was created almost a full year before Coinbase, which many people think of as one of the earliest exchanges out there. I mean, since 2011, you've had a business in the space. And so my question to you is, in the early years, we didn't have the benefit of a ton of YouTube videos and conferences and content to understand the implications of some of these concepts. Was it clear to you back then that this was energy money, or how is your understanding of the interaction between Bitcoin and, let's call it, the principles of physics changed over the course of the years that you've been involved in the space?
No, to be honest, I came across Bitcoin through my involvement in the realm of payment systems. I was an engineer by my background is engineering, and I was working on payment system. I had been working for 20 years or so back then, when I got this famous paper. So I had a chance to read it, among the first people to read it, probably. And I immediately felt it was going to be huge, because this is something that people were trying to achieve, notably Nick Szabo with BitGold in the late 90s. Tried to put together something like Bitcoin. And then when it got published in 2008, it was just mind-boggling. But to be honest, I approached it as a computer system, as a computer network, if you will. It's not until the subject of energy consumption was raised by essentially the enemies of Bitcoin, that is, the central bankers, started paying lobbyists and journalists to talk about how bad for the environment Bitcoin was. So that's when I started looking at the subject, because I guessed that this was probably fake news and a very distorted view of reality. And evidently, the more I studied the subject, the more it became obvious that energy was really playing an important role, and as I said, in the protocol, but also there was good reason for that. But to be honest, it took me probably 10 years, or I'd say it was around 2015, 2016, that the subject of energy was gaining speed, and that's when I really started studying energy. So it's been about 10 years now.
So you're credited as being the first person to give a talk on Bitcoin in French, which is a very a very cool title to have, or a very cool acknowledgement to have.
In Geneva, that was yeah.
What do you feel like is different in educating the more European mind than, say, the kind of Western or American mind on Bitcoin? Because as we've seen, the political willingness to embrace Bitcoin has been, at least in the recent years in America, very strong. But I've seen a very different tone when regulators in Europe are talking about these technologies, and in many ways, it's kind of lagging behind. How does that impact you? How does that impact your business? And what is it like to try and educate in Europe specifically?
I think it has, as you correctly said, it is very much something cultural. I think the culture in America, in the United States in particular, is about freedom. Economic freedom is really central to the political systems in America. Whereas in Europe, we still live in the aftermath of World War II. That is, we still think that the communists played a role in getting us rid of the Nazis, if you will. That's how bad, how distorted the worldview is in Europe. That is So we have Europe has become a communist land, not by revolution, but by strangulation, by a very slow process of strangulation. Whereas it's exactly what Friedrich Hayek has described in his books. If you remember these Austrian economics teachers and writers. So Friedrich Hayek has explained very well how the state becomes bigger and bigger if it has no counterpower. So in America, there are counterpowers to the state, starting with the right to bear arms, for instance. So that puts you in a different situation, in a different bargaining situation, if you will, with the state, because you are considered a responsible individual capable of defending himself. In Europe, in France in particular, you cannot have a weapon. You can, even at home, if you use it at home, you will end up in jail because you are not supposed to shoot at an intruder. And that's typical of a totalitarian communist regime. They want to disarm citizens. So that they can control them. It's all about control, and Bitcoin is the opposite of control by the state. It's economic freedom, and it's becoming free to transact with who you want to transact with, and with the money you want to use for the transaction. And again, Europe has become pretty much communist. In France, for instance, the public spendings is now, I think, 57% of the the GDP. 57% of the GDP means it's higher than USSR at the end of when Gorbachev was running USSR.
Wow.
That's how bad it has become. And when the state spends so much, that means you have the population that depends on the state for their income. And once you've reached that tipping point, it's very difficult to go back to a normal life. I'd say to free to economic freedom, because again, there are too many people that benefit from the state and too few people that actually create wealth in the country. So the country gets poorer. In fact, in France, for instance, GDP is going down compared to other countries where it's growing more rapidly. It's really going down compared to other countries, and that's a direct result of socialism. Socialists, that's never worked nowhere. It's not working in Europe either. But it's so that's why I think Bitcoin has its full place in the United States, for instance, or in countries where you have economic freedom, whereas in Europe it's struggling. It's struggling to gain acceptance by the governments, because it goes against their objectives to control the people.
So I imagine you've had this conversation quite a bit, living in France and being as connected as you are with energy and understanding how this impacts civilization. But France, for a long time, has been famous for having a very robust nuclear energy generation system, which over the last couple of years has been undergoing a decommissioning. And if you were to speak to, say, a French regulator, how would you describe to them why connecting our money to energy is a more sustainable monetary system, to try and help them understand why undoing the cleanest, most stable fuel that they've had for generations is not a good idea and actually could be the most powerful tool for them?
Yeah, it's very difficult to talk to regulators, because they are essentially appointed by politicians, and again, there is a lot of ideology in the back of their minds. And frankly, I let my friends that are involved in the mining industry do this more often than I do, because I have a sense I waste my time talking to these people. I think what we need is really a counterpower, and it's again it's sorely lacking. But the more people we use Bitcoin, I think in general, the more we'll have counterpower against the government, and that's really what should be done. And also cut public spending for the reasons I was referring to earlier. That is, the more you spend, the more you have people supporting the state and being supported by the state, and the more difficult it is to break free from this bind. So that's that's why I talk to there are only one or two political parties in France that are in favor of economic freedoms. All the others are different flavors of socialism. So it's very difficult to talk to these people. I can tell you, I've done that, and I have stopped doing it because I felt again I wasted my time. I prefer to talk to people interested in economic freedom and convince them that Bitcoin is a way to achieve more economic freedom. I think that's in my view, it's more a productive use of my time than talking to regulators. But you are correct in saying that they are overlooking a major opportunity to monetize the energy surplus. But I don't know if you've talked about energy in the United States. I suppose you did a lot too. But when you talk about energy surplus, people find it hard to believe that there are surpluses because they are educated to think that energy is scarce. So when you say there are surpluses, they are surprised, and and then once they understand there are surpluses, then the next thing they tell you is that, well, we could do something else with more useful with surpluses. Then I have to explain to them that by definition, if there is a surplus, that is, there is no other use. Otherwise, it's not a surplus. If there is another usage for the energy, then it's not a surplus, and it's probably too expensive for miners to use. But again, this goes. It takes a lot of. It's Brandolini's law. It takes a lot of time and energy to go against fake news. That is just to state fake news, and that's our work. I guess you and I are sharing this load.
That I only found out about Brandolini's law a couple of years ago, and it was one of my favorite things to understand. I think the quote is, "It takes infinitely more energy to disprove bullshit than it does to speak it." That was just rang so true, and you just unpacked one aspect of this, which is energy, and I spend a lot of my time educated on exactly what you just said, is that most people come from this scarcity mindset around energy, thinking, oh, we can't waste it, we can't use more of it because there's not enough. And we find that Bitcoin, there's a saying that Bitcoin is everything people don't understand about the internet combined with everything that they don't understand about money, and now we can add combined with everything they don't understand about energy.
Exactly.
When you're educating people, I know that you've got this very deep engineering background, you've built businesses, you've got to approach something like Bitcoin from this interdisciplinary lens and unpack misconceptions in many industries that people barely ever get below surface depth in their lifetime. How do you unpack some of these misconceptions? We just talked about energy, but around the network side of Bitcoin, the monetary side of Bitcoin, what are some things that you use when you're teaching and educating about this? Other than, of course, people can pick up your book, Energy: The Flip Side of Money. And you also wrote another one several years ago as well. I don't know if that's a more applicable one for some of the foundational principles of how this network works.
The other one was not translated in English, so I still have to do the translation. But yes, I released a bit what I call then a Bitcoin book, and people bought it thinking it was in English, but in fact it was a Bitcoin book. I thought it was a cool title, but it was written in French and never got to have it translated because after that many books were released, and I just dropped it. So, but this time about energy, yes, I felt it was important to spread the word as much as possible. But yes, there are tons of misconceptions, as you said, and in fact, even before misconceptions, people have used some concepts without really having even a simple definition of the concept. So we talked about the concepts of energy and entropy, which are quite scientific, I would say. But take a simple concept like scarcity. Scarcity is something that most people will have a hard time defining, or they will essentially tell you, things that don't even make sense about scarcity. That's why I approach the definition of scarcity through the lens of science of energy. And for me, scarcity can be measured in joule, in energy, by the amount of energy it takes to get something. Just as simple as that. The amount of energy you need to spend, to use, to get something. That's what defines scarcity. So this energy has several components. The obvious one is the energy of exploration. That is the energy you spend just to find the thing, or to dig it, or to mine it for Bitcoin. That's I would say exploration energy. But also, in most cases, you also have logistics, energy spent to get that thing in your hands. If you talk about the scarcity, that's also a factor for, at least for physical goods. And there are other components, but in the end, you have a measure, an objective measure of scarcity through energy as an amount of energy. So you can measure scarcity in joule, and that's, to me, that's a place to start if you want to get people become rational about this, because evidently scarcity is used, as you know, in political debates. When people want to control something, they will say it's scarce. So you have to use it this way or this way because it's scarce. You cannot do it as you want. You cannot be free to use it if it's scarce. So the scarcity is highly political. It's politically loaded concept. Just like energy and entropy are politically loaded also. So that's why it's so interesting to go back to energy, because that's where all the fundamentals are located, I would say. And I haven't mentioned the third principle of the science of energy, which is in effect the most of my book is devoted to the third principle, in fact, because the first two are fairly well known. The conservation and entropy principles are fairly well known. The third is much less known. It's been invented by Mr. Ilya Prigozhin, Nobel Prize, 1977 Nobel Prize of Chemistry. And it's fascinating. It says that an open system will self-organize to maximize the energy flowing through it. And that's, again, a very simple statement, but it has very deep philosophical and practical implications. And that's why I devoted a book to this third principle. In fact, the title of the book could have been The Third Principle, but my publisher felt Energy, the Flip Side of Money was a better title.
So for the benefit of the audience, let's go deeper into that third principle. Why does it matter so much that if you have an open system, it's going to become the channel for the maximum energy possible? What are the implications of that? Why is that such a profound realization?
Well, it's an explanation of many of our behaviors, because we are, as living beings, we are an open system. And we belong to a much bigger open system, which is the species, which itself belongs to another open system, that's the planet, etc., etc. All the open systems are, in fact, embedded in the next scale, if you will, starting with elementary particles, all the way to atoms, molecules, living beings, species, etc. Once you understand that, you can observe that their behavior is pretty much the same. They all tend to self-organize to maximize the energy flowing through them. For instance, the species will tend to optimize through Darwinian evolution to capture the maximum amount of energy. For instance, maximum amount of prey, because food is chemical energy that you process to produce work. So the species will self-organize through Darwinian evolution, and just that is is an important enough consequence of the third principle to just to stop there and think about it. And the individual will also do this at the individual level. So you will gather knowledge to reduce your entropy and maximize. So that's self-organization, by the way. Reducing your entropy is self-organization at the individual level. So you gather knowledge, and that way you will capture more energy because you become smarter about your environment, essentially. That's what you do at the individual level to, as a result of the third principle. And I could go on and on about giving you, tons of other examples of third principle at play. And that's why it's so important to know it, to know that it exists, that there is a physical law of the universe that's there to explain many things that happened around us. And that's again the motivation for the book.
I think, it's an important parallel because most of the systems that matter to people are open systems, whether you think about the body or an economic system or something like Bitcoin. Uh, Michael Saylor talks briefly about, when we're in engineering school, we're always modeling based on an adiabatic system where there's no energy gain or energy loss. Just because if there's energy coming into a system or leaving a system, it's very challenging to ever solve a problem. You introduce too much variability and change in order for you to be able to model it simply. And so we have to solve these problems in a closed system in most cases, just so that we can wrap our heads around them, but it doesn't really map to reality. Most of the profound things that occur in the world that we live in are occurring in an open system. And so understanding how an open system interacts with energy is, in a way, a much more profound, a much more useful way to be able to navigate the actual world you live in, not the supposed world that we solve engineering problems on paper with.
Yeah, that's very true, because when we say open system, as you said, it's all real systems in real life, because a closed system exists only in a laboratory or in a thought experiment. It cannot exist in real life because it will be exposed to an inflow of energy, and it will inevitably have to process this energy. Otherwise, it will just disappear. So all the systems in real life are actually open systems. You're absolutely right.
So, how do you think about applying this? Because I always love when entrepreneurs and business owners come from an engineering background. How do you think about engineering a business system? And how do you feel about the interaction between sort of engineering principles and physics principles and building a business in the real world and being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, the company is also an open system, but it's also a social construct, and social constructs are ways for the species to, again, to self-organize. So again, it's all a consequence of the third principle. But it's kind of difficult because, I guess, to derive useful guidelines for running a business, because it's too it is at a very fundamental level that the third principle is applied at macroscopic level, like in a complex structure, especially like a company. It has little impact. It helps understand behaviors, as I said, for the species or for the individual. But for the company, it's more difficult because it's a very complex system in a very complex economy. And as you know, the economy is getting more complex, I would say, over time. And today, the economy in the 21st century is evidently much more complex than it was, for instance, in medieval times. So that's why I see little help from the third principle as an entrepreneur, as a founder.
Have you ever felt like you've done everything right, built the business, made smart investments, and yet there's still one piece missing? If you're someone who believes in Bitcoin but hasn't yet explored mining, let me introduce you to something that most people never even realize exists, and that is fully managed Bitcoin mining with Abundant Mines. We help high net worth individuals like you own industrial grade mining infrastructure without ever touching the machines. It's hands free, professionally hosted, and designed to generate passive income by turning electricity into Bitcoin every single day. It's tax advantaged, it's asset backed, and for many of our clients, it's become one of the smartest moves that they've ever made in their investing career. So if you're ready to take the next step into real Bitcoin ownership, not just holding, but producing it at a discount, visit abundantminds.com. That's abundantminds.com and see why this strategy is changing the game for serious investors. I've seen you talk about how economic freedom is strongly correlated with GDP and actual GDP for countries that have more economic freedom. And saw an interesting study yesterday talking about Singapore, where there's this very uh, low amount of high risk taking entrepreneurial activity, and entrepreneur is one of the few French words that I know other than beau, my name. Um, what do you think about the risk that entrepreneurs take, the reward that entrepreneurs receive, how economic freedom correlates to entrepreneurs being able to go out and actually create a solution for the market and be rewarded for it?
Yeah, I think the entrepreneurs their role in society is to spot the areas and the domains and the applications where wealth can be created. That's their job, and that's something the state does very poorly. When it's the state that's doing it, like it tends to do in Europe, as we said, in socialist countries, like countries of Europe, it does a terrible job, and the countries get poorer over time. Whereas if there is economic freedom, that means the state lets entrepreneurs determine, price, the formation of prices, what goods and services can be and should be produced, and with what amount of profits. That's exactly what the entrepreneurs do. That's the market, what the market does. But at the individual level, the market is made of entrepreneurs and customers. So if we let entrepreneurs and customers freedom to choose, for the entrepreneur is freedom to choose the services or the goods he wants to produce, and for consumers it's freedom to choose where they want to spend their money. Then we have optimal price formation, and we have a functional economy. Whenever the state interferes with that, it's a loss. It's a loss of wealth, for collective wealth. So that's what I think, and that's why what the studies that you mentioned show very clearly, that the more economic freedom, the higher the GDP.
So we often think about entrepreneurship and building businesses as building them within a jurisdiction. So many people are attracted to build a business in the US because there is this entrepreneurial spirit. There's a very widely understood benefit to raising money in the US, capital formation in the US, building a business in the US. But we could also think of Bitcoin as its own jurisdiction that people are building businesses within. Are there any particular either particular entrepreneurs or business models that you see being built on top of Bitcoin that are really catching your eye as truly innovative and very interesting?
Well, yeah, it's a question that I asked myself. I've been asking myself since 2011, when I started my Bitcoin business. Because back then, the pain point was, how do I get my hands on Bitcoin? So the exchanges were few and far apart, and kind of shady. They were not very inspiring a lot of trust. So that's when I started an exchange. But today, in 2025, there are so many options to choose from as an entrepreneur. As you said, it's a very valid question, and I keep asking myself, should we pivot or should we add a line of services to the exchange, etc. Because the exchange is the the bridge between fiat money and the other monetary systems. It's a hub, in fact, between monetary systems. But I'm intrigued by all these prediction markets and auction mechanisms that could be unleashed or enabled by Bitcoin scripts. Also, I stay away from smart contracts because I trust Bitcoin more than these shit coins. But I think we can do a lot with Bitcoin scripts, especially with the recent developments, including RGB and protocols, layer 2 protocols. So I think there are lots of things to be done in terms of, again, prediction markets, auction mechanism, in general, using Bitcoin as a payment mechanism because it's so powerful. It's so much more powerful than traditional payment systems. That it could unleash lots of new business models, very very innovative, and that are really, as you said, of worldwide scope. It has to be. I guess you have to start these businesses offshore, far from regulators, because regulators will try to impeach you, to try to stop you from innovating in these fields that tend to be regulated. I think prediction markets, for instance, are just forbidden in France because just as we said, it's become a communist country with very little individual freedom, very little freedom of speech. We even have. In France now we have a censorship authority that appointed by the president that decides which TV channel is okay and which TV channel is not okay. So it's becoming almost a caricature of a communist country. So it has to be offshore, but there are plenty of opportunities to be explored with, like I said, Bitcoin scripts and advanced Bitcoin transactions.
When you're building a business in this space, I mean, I think this isn't obvious to people who are outside of the Bitcoin space, but within it, it's very clear that your true hurdle rate when you're building a business and thinking about how you allocate capital and time and energy is overcoming the hurdle rate of the compound annual growth of Bitcoin. Are there any business models? I mean, for a while, exchanges have done so. Any business models you think have a long term chance of outperforming the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin itself?
That's an excellent question, Bo, because to be honest, if I'm facing the opportunity to invest in a company or keep my Bitcoins, as you said, I have to expect that this company will outperform Bitcoin. And there are not that many projects that will convince me that they can outperform Bitcoin. Michael Saylor has done a good job with Bitcoin Treasury Company, but that's a very basic business model. It's just accumulating Bitcoin and borrowing fiat to buy Bitcoin. So it's clever. It's extremely clever and well done by Michael Saylor and strategy, but it's almost the absence of a business model. It's not something that it's building on Bitcoin, but without really innovating, other than innovating in the field of financial instruments to drain the fiat system, the legacy system, into Bitcoin, which is very clever, and I have a lot of admiration for what Michael Saylor has achieved. But as far as innovation, technology innovation, it's kind of hard to. The examples I gave you, I think, can lead to exponential growth because they would be filling a gap today. The predictions are made by in very obsolete ways, inefficient. Same for auctions. Whenever there is inefficiency, and when Bitcoin can become a factor of a more efficient way of payment, evidently, we can see exponential growth, and therefore we can outperform Bitcoin. But I'd say, as an investor, the investor has to be very, very careful in evaluating these opportunities, I think.
Well, I like that you mentioned Saylor's Bitcoin treasury strategy because as an engineer, and he's an engineer, he has a very, very deep engineering background as well. When you engineer systems, you are looking to build a better world. And some would argue that that kind of engineering, financial engineering, even though it's exploiting inefficiency and making markets more efficient, not sure if it's adding a net benefit to the world. What do you think about financial engineering strategies as a business model, and does that actually create a net benefit for anybody?
I think it's very useful. What they're doing is extremely useful because it's helping is helping the world to switch from the fiat system to to hard money, to sound money, to Bitcoin. So it's very good in that sense. It's just exposing the fraud that fiat system has become. That is, printing money. And out of thin air, and inflating the state to the point where, as we said, for Europe, for instance, to the point where the state is turning against citizens, and now threatening freedom of speech, economic freedom first, but then freedom of speech, because the right to choose the money of your choice for transactions is fundamentally a freedom of speech, because transaction is a message. And that's something I wrote in 2011 in my first book. I started by, I think that's one of the first sentences. I said, transaction is a message. It's a signed message, by the way, but it's still a message. So if you are forced to use a monetary system, that means you don't have true freedom of speech. And we can see that, we've seen that very recently, again, taking an example in France. So there was an election, local election, and there was a Bitcoin candidate, someone
Hmm.
who was wanted to be elected as a member of the parliament with under the Bitcoin banner, if you will. And the banks refused to open a bank account for him for his campaign. And you had to have a dedicated bank account for your campaign, so your account can be audited by the authorities supervising the elections to make sure there was no money laundering or bad money going into the elections. So without a bank account, this candidate was really at disadvantage, obviously, compared to
Hmm.
the other candidates. So that's an example of lack of freedom of speech, lack of political freedom, in fact, directly linked to the freedom of transacting in the money of your choice. And if you are just advocating Bitcoin, you get censored by the banks. People get their bank accounts shut down. Still today, as we speak, there are people that see their bank account shut down by the bank without explanation, just because the bank has figured that they're using cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin or other, by the way. So that's a real problem. That's a real problem. And again, Michael Saylor, by draining money from this corrupt, dangerous system that is the fiat system, is helping the world. I think it's helping freedom around the world.
So I think we can all intuit why removing the energy waste or the energy loss from an economic system and tying our money to energy is more efficient and creates more value for people. But can you talk a little bit about how tying our money to energy also increases freedom for people? Because as I understand it, because of Bitcoin, if you have access to energy, you have access to sovereign money. So in a sense, tying Bitcoin to energy is a forcing function for sovereignty. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in general, the competition between monetary system is good, and the monopoly, the real problem, as we said, is the monopoly that Friedrich Hayek has explained that in his famous essay, "The Nationalization of Money," back in 1976. So he was a visionary because the perfect money he describes is pretty much Bitcoin because it says these private monies that will compete against will compete between themselves and also against the state money. These private monies will be successful if their promoters are prudent in terms of money creation, and they don't manipulate the money supply too much. They don't inflate the money supply. So, from that perspective, Bitcoin is perfect money in the eyes of Friedrich Hayek. If he had lived today, he would have said that Bitcoin is perfect money. So, if we foresee a world in which we have competition between different currencies, there are only two, in fact, two kinds of money. Then you end up with the state money, the fiat system, and you have Bitcoin. Because why would you choose, inferior type of private money? And we can see that with proof of stake currencies, like Ethereum, Solana, etc. They compete in terms of functionality and tokenization, etc. But as monetary system, I guess everybody's realized that they're not really competing against Bitcoin. Uh, so that's an interesting uh, twist in the history of money, because Hayek described a world in which we'd have plenty of different currencies competing against each other. And today, I would say that we'd have competition between two very different systems that are, two polar opposites on a spectrum. The more centralized, the spectrum of centralization. So the more centralized with fiat, and the more decentralized with Bitcoin. And I just wonder if there is room in between for these two extremes. I wonder if there is room for other currencies in between. Probably yes, but it's hard to tell today, at least.
Having seen the evolution of this space for now 15 years or more, what still concerns you about adoption, about its place in the world? Are there any things that you feel like the Bitcoin space in general has gotten complacent about? I mean, it's been a very profound couple of years in terms of adoption and political adoption, and a very serious shifting, not just around Bitcoin, but also Bitcoin mining is starting to be treated a little bit more fairly in editorials, and people are writing about it, which was part of what got me into the space, was just how unfairly it was treated and knowing different. What still concerns you about the path forward?
To be honest, I'm bullish about Bitcoin. I see no red light anywhere. I see regulators fighting a lost battle, trying to stop Bitcoin. Clearly, they are siding with central bankers today. They are, in fact, appointed by central bankers today. We have a revolving door mechanism where they are central bankers one day and they are regulators the next, and vice versa. So this is the legacy system, and it's dying. I think it's dying. I think just very much like Michael Saylor, from this perspective, I'm very optimistic. No, the concerns are more. Uh, can Bitcoin itself, become, for instance, complexity is the enemy of security. As you know, all people that have dealt with cryptography, like I did in my early days, know that the complexity is the enemy of security. So my only concern is that Bitcoin becomes too complex, and I'm saying that the day when version 0.30 was released, and it's a very brilliant piece of work. Bitcoin Core is a brilliant piece of work, but Bitcoin Core point 3 was released today, and it has lots of let's say, new features or enhancements of existing features. And that my concern is that it becomes too complex and too many features, and that could be distraction from the main objective of Bitcoin, which is to set up sound money, a sound monetary system for the world. That's my only concern, really.
Well, you mentioned a very contentious point in the Bitcoin community right now, which is the core versus knots debate. And the brilliance and the reward for entrepreneurs is having an opinion that most people disagree with you about and being right about it. So I'm curious, doesn't have to be core versus knots, but is there anything that you strongly believe at this moment that most people would disagree with you on as it relates to Bitcoin at this current time?
Uh, that's an interesting question. That's difficult to answer. To be honest, because there are lots of different opinions within the Bitcoin ecosystem. That's the beauty of it, and that's what I like about it. You even have people that are still almost leftists, no, that are in favor of Bitcoin, and then you have people like me that are all about economic freedom. So we have many different spectrums within the Bitcoin ecosystem. Yeah, but we all remember the debate about the block size, the block size in 2017, and now with knots, we see something similar. That's about complexity versus simplicity. And again, I tend to side with the simplicity approach, and obviously I'll be a minority because many more people will want to have more functionalities because they are not they are, again, they are distracted. They are, but if you have a line, if you have a business like Bitcoin does today, but again, Bitcoin is not a company, so the governance of Bitcoin is very nimble. It's very difficult to grasp how Bitcoin is really governed. In fact, my hope is that it's not governed precisely, but I would tend to favor simplicity over complexity, and that's why I like the Knots initiative. But I'm not. I don't have a strong opinion as to what choice should be made by miners. You're probably in a better position than I am to talk about that. It's just that as a user and an exchange, running an exchange, I like the approach taken by Knots in this initiative to keep it simple. Well,
Mhm.
that's what I like about Knots.
I think that's great a great phrase to live by, not just in this case, but in almost anything. Simplicity is the way to go, and the adage is simplicity scales and complexity fails, and that especially applies when you're building complex interrelated systems and businesses. And I think it's worthy advice to take heed of. So you've spent the last few years really focusing in on the energy aspect of the network. And as miners, we are deeply connected to that energy, both the energy use, energy transformation, making the most of it. What advice, if any, do you have for the miners out there who are currently operating, who are the heartbeat of the network, and people who are thinking about getting into mining? Do you have any words of either encouragement, advice, or philosophy to help them understand why they're doing this as it ties to energy?
Well, first of all, I would say that they're doing something very useful. Just like we said that treasury companies are doing something useful by draining the fiat system. I think miners are doing something obviously very useful by contributing to the security of the network. So that's the most important thing in my view. And I would not be in a position to give advice because I'm not in this business. I'm just looking at it from the outside. But from the outside, it looks to me that it's a business. It's about securing electricity contracts at a good price. That's the best price. That's the number one job of miners, I think, and that's interesting because they are chasing as I said, electricity surpluses around the world. So that's a fascinating task and never ending. And in fact, surpluses can pop up where they are not expected. So I think it's just fascinating. And the other job of miners is to source the hardware to mine to populate the racks in their data centers, and that's also fascinating stuff because I know it's difficult to put your hands on good and cheap hardware to get the best prices, etc. So that's also a fascinating job. So I'm not qualified to do it, but I'm just admiring what they are doing because those two jobs are very challenging, I think. It's because you're addressing huge suppliers. The electricity suppliers are usually pretty big, but you could also make a business model out of run of the river facilities, small facilities. So you have so many options to choose from. It's fascinating business, but again, I'm not qualified to give advice to people actually doing it like you.
Well, if you ever want to get involved, let me know. Be happy to help. Um, as we come to the end of this, I would love to hear from you. You've had such a long journey, not just in Bitcoin itself, but engineering across many disciplines, ideology, energy, philosophy. I mean, there's so much that we could unpack with you. What do you hope that your impact on the space or the world is through your writing, through your business? If you could optimally predict what people say about what you were able to accomplish 20 years from now, what would they be saying?
I'd say I was one of the many people, I'd say many, one of the few people at the beginning that were trying to spread the word around them in the early days. I started essentially in 2011 because before then I wasn't sure enough about the success and about the technology, the network technology. But starting 2011, I felt it was my duty to spread the word. And you can imagine that I encountered lots of obstacles. In fact, I wrote a book, as I said, that I called the Bitcoin book, and I tried to get a publisher in 2011. And I was stupid because I should have known that no existing publisher would publish such a book. So I ended up self-publishing. But in 2012, almost a year later, I gave up and I self-published the book. So I could have published it earlier, and maybe I would have reached more people. But the few people I was able to talk to, then I hope I convinced a few, and I think that's how it started. But what's interesting is that people like Michael Saylor, for instance, he came to Bitcoin only in 2020. But I think he did a lot more in terms of convincing many more people because he got access to more powerful people, and he did it in a very an environment, a very different environment in the United States, where economic freedom is really appreciated. But you do with the context that's given to you. So I can say that with the context that was given to me, I did my best, and I was useful because Bitcoin is present in France and in Europe, and I think that's also because there are Bitcoiners all around the world that did what I did and what I do today, and still is educating people about money and energy and leading them naturally to sound money like Bitcoin. I changed the way I try to educate people because, as you said correctly, now I start with money and energy. So once people get the two concepts connected in their head, it's much easier to talk about Bitcoin, and it's much easier to explain the difference between Bitcoin and fiat or proof of stake money. But I think everybody should that understand Bitcoin, like you and I. We have almost a duty to spread the word with our own words, because everybody has a different way of presenting Bitcoin. Again, because of its cultural context, and yours is different than mine, but we can see Bitcoin flourish everywhere in Latin America. It's fascinating stuff. What's happening in El Salvador, in Asia, etc. So that's really what gets us interested, also, and keeps us interested, is the fact that it's a worldwide phenomenon, and we meet, as I suppose you do too. We meet lots of interesting, smart people along the way, and that's also the reward of talking about Bitcoin full time.
And you never know, especially if you've written a book or you're public about your thoughts, who is going to hear them, who's going to latch onto them. You might be the seventh or 70th time that they've heard something, but it's you having the courage and the willingness to continue to speak about it that helps them understand something that changes their life. So personally, I want to thank you for writing a book, writing a couple books actually, and anybody who's willing to write a book going deep on energy and thermodynamics, I have deep respect for. So Pierre, thank you for sharing your time with me, with the audience. For people who want to keep up with what you're working on, for people who want to find the book or follow you on social, how can they keep up with you?
I have a Twitter account where I share my thoughts on my findings. I have a blog in French, so I cannot recommend it to a US based audience. But yeah, the book has been translated, so I show the cover because I like it a lot. It's a German artist that did the cover, and yeah, reach out through Twitter. That's probably the best way to keep in touch.
We'll link the book, we'll link your socials, and make sure that people can keep in touch and keep up with what you're working on. And appreciate you sharing your time, Pierre. It was really great to have you.
Thanks very much, Bo.